All right. Great to see a nice crowd here tonight. Thank you for coming. Please be seated if you're standing up. And for all of you that are here with us online, thank you for being here also. And we look forward to having a class here to increase our understanding and our ability to teach the peaceful solution. And also to learn to practice the peaceful solution too. So we are in one of my most liked books, actually, and that's the Self-Control Unit. And I'd like to encourage everybody to really pay attention to what's going on with that and the things you learn in the Self-Control Unit. It's very interesting because you've got to have self-control to continue growing and practicing the peaceful solution in every aspect of it. Of course, you've got to have the character unit to learn what character is in the first place, right? And so then we grow a little bit and we learn how to accept ourselves and accept our situations and accept others, and then we continue to grow a little bit more, and now we're in self-control. And so we'll be reverting back now and then to the other books along the way as we go further, and just like to thank everybody for being here. So we're currently in the, like I said, the self-control unit. If the overhead is working, we're in the self-control unit right now. I was going to show you a picture of it here. Okay, well, we'll get to it sooner or later. So we'll be starting out on page 5 after just a very brief review. Now, in the last class, Certificaton covered a few pages. We'll just look back at page number 4 in the self-control unit, and it is the question of the day: what is self-control? Self-control is controlling, that is, guiding or directing what you think because thoughts lead to feelings, and controlling what you feel because feelings lead to actions. Controlling how you behave because decisions lead to actions which lead to rewards or consequences. And so one of the things that we, when remembering what self-control is, you want to latch on to what you can understand here about what self-control is. I always kind of remembered self-control as, if I wasn't practicing self-control, then there might be somebody else doing the controlling, self-control, or someone else controlling, kind of like a puppet on a string. If you can imagine standing there and someone else is controlling you, and that's kind of how it is if we're letting every little thing that might come our way affect us, and we don't practice that self-control and think about think about the whole situation and what would be the best move to go forward, all in not hurting ourselves, others, or property, or the environment. We need to keep those things in mind. So anyways, moving on over to page 5, we'll be starting there new tonight. Let's go back and look at the lesson plan real quick, though. I'd like to point out something. If you go to lesson plan 1, page F, lesson plan 1, page F. Well, let's go back to page E first. So the first page with the lesson plan, and you'll see on there, down at the bottom, the last teacher, Certificaton, the procedure that he was doing. At the bottom it says, have students continue reading, rewind, and review, which of course he covered that, and it's found on page 4. Now, if we move on to the next page to see what the next procedure consists of, we go on to page 3, and it says, emphasize to students that because self-control is so important to society, it is the first step of character development. Now, look at this. It says instruct students to read the importance of self-control, found on page 8. Well, where's page 5, 6, and 7? We just forget that and go on to page 8? Is that what we need to do? No. So page 5, 6, and 7 is a continuation of the process that was spoken about, or the procedure spoken about in procedure number 2. See, at the bottom of the procedure number 2, it says everyone in society needs to practice self-control in order to live peacefully together. Explain that crime is only one example of the lack of self-control, and allow students time to discuss other ways that the lack of self-control affects society. So we're learning about self-control. We're learning how it affects people, how it affects ourselves. And so moving on to page 5, the title of that page is actually People Need People Who Have High Moral Character. So this is a continuation on before we start procedure 3. So if you will, join me on page 5. Now, at the very top it says, the following is a review of what it means to be a person with a high moral character regarding people, property, and the environment. And you can see the diversity of the people that it's talking about. You know, you might recognize some of the cultures or religions or whatever is displayed there. And so it's everybody needs everybody else. And we should treat everybody, of course, with respect and exhibit that high moral character in everything that we do. It takes a little while to get there, and we're going to make mistakes along the way. Myself, I can think of a few this week that I would like to change for sure, choices that were made. But if we continue here, when your decision and your interactions with others always reflect the use of true moral values, and we're going to go back and visit values for a minute, you accept and appreciate that everyone has the right to live in peace, safety, and security. Notice it says that everyone has the right to live in peace, safety, and security. It doesn't say that we're the only ones that have that right, though I don't know of many people that do feel like they're living very peacefully and secure with the surrounding situation in the world, in not only here in the United States, but also in other countries that are nearby and countries far away. There's always a boogeyman, if you will. There's always someone wanting to start a war. There's always somebody complaining about this country did that, and there's sanctions, and there's bombs, and there's fighting, and it's just a constant thing. So I don't know how anybody could say they really live in peace, safety, and security right now. The closest thing that could probably come to it is those that are local enough and able to really dig into and get into the Peaceful Solution Character Education classes, whether it be the teacher certification course or the normal classes, whether you're online or again locally. But that's the closest thing to being able to have that peace, safety, and security, is knowing that within yourself. You can't control what anybody else does or how they react or conduct themselves, but you can surely control what you do. So even in the worst situation, you can have peace in knowing that what you have with the Peaceful Solution, what you have is a great moral character that nobody can take away from you. They can make it very hard on you, and you can give it away, but nobody can take it away from you. So there's some peace in knowing that. Okay. So continuing, it says you can demonstrate a moral attitude by being respectful to all people. This means not taking advantage of others. And that's so easy to do. There's so many different ways to take advantage of others that we get involved in sometimes. But showing them compassion and consideration. And, compassion, I asked people, what is that? What is compassion? And, compassion is when you're wanting to relieve the suffering of others, when you care for others, you care about what's going on with them. And compassion can be exhibited in many different ways. It can be exhibited in being respectful and treating a person properly. It can be exhibited in your ability to empathize with others and see where they've been and what they've been through, and similar to walking a mile in their shoes, so to speak, the old saying. And you can be a compassionate individual and considering others. What is their plight? What are they trying to do? What kind of roadblocks or stumbling blocks do they have in their way to achieving a great high moral character, and how can we help them in understanding what they've been through and are going through? I think, communicating, we've already talked about communication and being able to listen, really listening, hearing what a person has to say, being an active listener. It takes practice, but being an active listener is one way you can show compassion to another, in letting them talk and tell you what's on their mind. And you might not have to sympathize with everything that they talk about, but you can probably empathize with what they might be going through. So immoral values. Let's talk about moral. What makes something moral or immoral? And in the character unit on page 8, it covers it very well. Remember, we're going to be going back and forth between the character unit, acceptance unit, self-control, and then as we move on, we'll continue moving through the books. But on page 8 of the character unit, morals, what do they have to do with my character? And it starts out by talking about regardless of culture. And remember, on page 5 in the self-control book, we see the different cultures and religions that are exhibited right there. And these, regardless of culture, religion, or environment, no matter what, no matter where a person's from, no matter what their background is, these values are values that all people share. They're called moral values. A moral value is like a line that divides wrong behavior from right behavior. People from all walks of life, young or old, big or small, rich or poor, share some of these same basic concepts of moral values. So, morality can be divided into 3 basic categories. Behavior and attitude towards all life. That includes human, animal, plant, everything. Behavior and attitude towards possessions and property. And behavior and attitude towards the environment. Moral principles in regards to human life means acknowledging and accepting that life is valuable and all people have the potential to contribute to society. And they have a right to live. All people have a right to live and be the best that they can be. When you have a moral attitude towards others, you accept and appreciate that they have the right to live in peace, safety, and security. See that again right there? The peace, safety, and security. You accept that people have a right to that. They might not be achieving it right now because of our surroundings. You can demonstrate a moral attitude by being respectful towards all people, and it means not taking advantage of others, but rather showing them care and concern. Almost exactly like what we just read on page 5. This means not taking advantage of others, but showing them compassion and consideration. See, it's the same thing. Now, an immoral attitude towards life consists of behaviors that devalue, belittle, hurt, and take from others, both emotionally and physically. Behaviors that include name-calling. Think about this for a minute. Behaviors that include name-calling, teasing, bullying, and discriminating cause others to feel inferior. Now, we just went through an entire section of the acceptance book talking about discrimination and how it leads to bullying and how the teasing and so forth, it really is bullying. There's no, I was just having fun with you. I was just funning you, Well, no, you're bullying, trying to get people to do something that they didn't want to do possibly. But these behaviors cause others to feel inferior, and it disregards their worth as human beings. Physically hurting others includes being aggressive and violent towards them, and includes these other, rape, kidnapping, murder, and so forth. But those who have an immoral attitude towards human life often direct acts of cruelty towards those who are weaker or unable to defend themselves. You know, when you think about bullies, a lot of times, now I haven't seen cases where it was the other way around, but most of the time a bully is someone who looks for someone that they would consider weaker than them, whether they consider them to be weaker mentally or physically, smaller than them or so forth. That's who they're going to bully. You wouldn't see somebody, I don't know what example I could give. I guess if you lived in the time of Einstein and you thought you were some kind of smart, I don't know if you'd go up against him on some of the equations that he was familiar of and trying to bully him to find your way, and really, I don't believe that that most of us would choose to bully someone that is the world champion weightlifter or something like that, or karate king of the world, whatever it would be that you would choose. I don't think people choose to go up and bully those people, So they're looking for someone that they consider to be less than them. That's usually what a bully does. And you can see that even though someone might be bigger than somebody else, that person, the smaller person, might think they're intellectually superior and therefore try to bully in a manner of manipulation and so forth. So these are things to look for and to look for in yourselves to make sure that you're not doing, because it does hurt others. It doesn't matter if it was a physical bullying or mental bullying. You do hurt people by doing it. In fact, the name calling, I'll tell you, there's people who have been affected all their lives by the name calling, and even when they're in 60, 70 years old or older, can remember the name calling from grade school or high school that they were bullied with, and it affects them. They just relive the whole thing again. And yeah, the peaceful solution helps us deal with those things. But wouldn't it be great if we didn't have those things taking place in the first place? Wouldn't it be great if none of us were ever involved in any of those things, whether we were on the receiving end or the giving end? Something to really keep in mind. So, morals, these are things that we can all agree and agree with, that these moral values. Again, we make wrong decisions, and people break these moral rules or these values, these rules, all the time. Let's turn over to page 6 real quick and look at values themselves. Now, we talked about immoral and moral for a minute, and those values. If you look at page 6, values, and we've been over this several times, but this is worth remembering and going over as many times as you possibly can. Values are what you believe in and feel strongly about, and they also play a key role in developing your character. The sum total of everything you value becomes your value system. We're not going to go through all of this, but just briefly to say, everybody has values, and you might not have ever looked at and put a label on your values or looked at your value system, but I bet everybody in here could, and everybody online could choose one thing that they really perceive themselves to have a high value on. Now, some people I know have an extremely high value on human life and would never think about taking a human life, even if someone was fixing to take theirs. They would rather have their life taken than them take somebody's life. That's how strongly they feel about it. Now, that's a high value, right, on human life. Some people have a high value on avoiding falling into that trap of stealing, and they do everything they can possibly do to avoid that. And I'm not talking about just going up and walking into a store and looking around, making sure the clerk's not looking and grabbing something. I'm talking about stealing in many different ways that some people aren't even aware of. Stealing a person's reputation. That's a horrible thing, It's equivalent with murder. If you steal their reputation by talking bad about them to other people, gossiping, you are a thief. And I do know people that work very hard to try to keep from ever being involved in that situation. And we all need to. So high value, not stealing, not doing anything to harm anybody. Then there are others that value, have very high value on, driving a nice car. I know a lot of people like that too. Then I know people that have a very high value on whatever mode of transportation they have and can get, whether it be walking or a bicycle, a car, or what have you, and they're thankful to have whatever they have, and they place a high value on that item that they have that helps them to get to where they're going, even if it's walking. There's people that place a high value on possessions, and some people have possessions that they would never think about parting with, that might not even mean anything to me or you, but they mean a lot to them. So when these values, and we're talking about moral values, so keep that in mind. And let's go back to page 5 for a minute. I'm going to reread this. So in the second paragraph, it starts out and says, immoral values reflected in your decision and interactions with others result in behavior that belittle and hurt both emotionally and physically. And, as we move on into the peaceful solution, we're going to find that emotional hurt sometimes is much worse than the physical hurt. In fact, people who have been emotionally bullied in their lives, some will tell you that I would rather they would have hit me in the face than to have said what they said to me. Because the hitting can go away. The emotional bullying, that emotional hurt, stays with you again, like we said, for a lifetime. Name-calling, teasing, bullying, and discriminating can cause others to feel inferior. Verbally or physically hurting yourself or others, or even just displaying an aggressive or violent attitude, are sure signs of a lack of self-control. Even displaying it in any way, aggression towards somebody or don't know, but the aggression that has to be brought under control, and nobody can control you. They can use force to where you choose to do a certain thing that they want you to do, and you can give away your control, but nobody can control you but yourself if you choose. And that's what we're talking about with self-control. So, continuing on, did you know that in addition to displaying an immoral attitude towards others, individuals could also display the same attitude towards themselves? Choices that involve the risk-taking behavior such as premarital sex, drug and alcohol abuse are examples of ways in which millions of people devalue their own lives. And this behavior is the leading cause of sexually transmitted diseases, STDs, and degeneration of the mind and health, all of which can lead to death. Really? It can lead to death? Yes, it can and does. Many of the diseases, as people progress in age, many of the diseases that doctors point out to people that they have, it can all be traced back to STDs that you didn't even know you had, from actions past, maybe possibly when you were younger, But yes, these risk-taking behaviors have an effect on you as you age that you just can't even imagine. Drug and alcohol abuse, there are some drugs that, seem to have some benefit along the way, but probably have more harm than great benefit. And then, of course, alcohol abuse. A small amount of alcohol is not bad for anybody, but if you abuse it, drunkenness, it's abusive. and it has an effect on you. It has an effect on your mind. It has an effect on your body, your liver, things that you'll carry the rest of your life. So it's important to remember these things. And if you've done any of these things, you didn't get by with anything just because you're 40 or 50 years old or whatever, sitting here right now, and seem to be in fair health, or you're not laying in the hospital or dead. You didn't get by with nothing. Whatever ailments you do have are caused by these things. If we wouldn't have been a part of these things in our lives, we would have a full, abundant life. And us or our parents or our grandparents or great-grandparents before us, it all gets passed down. So it does take starting over on these things. But keep in mind that some of the attitudes that we have too are affected by whatever risk-taking behaviors we've taken in the past, because it affects our body, it affects our mind, it affects our ability to make proper decisions and choices. And so we struggle with things sometimes. Everybody does. And we can't look at one person. This is part of being compassionate and considering the other person. If somebody's doing something we don't like and we think, man, what a jerk, well, I can't believe he did that. Well, he might be looking at you saying, hey, what a jerk, I can't believe he did that. But you're doing two totally different things. We have to consider what the person's been through. We have to consider what they're going through and learn to deal with each individual on whatever is ailing them, on whatever is taking place in their life. And remembering that these things has affected our minds. I'm sure somebody that never partook in drugs and alcohol abuse, they probably have a much sharper mind than some of us that might have been involved in these things could ever imagine. Some of the children that I know that have never been involved in any of these things, some of them even on up into the teen and early adult years, they've got to have a much sharper mind than some of us that have been involved in things that we would rather go back and change if we could, but we can't at this point. Of course, we can share with others what we've been through. Let's go on to page 5. I really, when we're talking about having compassion and considering others and not displaying violence and so forth, it just means a lot to me that we try our best to do these things. So let's go past page 5 on to page 6. Normally at this point we might go to the procedure, but since we already know that our procedure, talking about page 5, 6, and 7, it's really not mentioning those pages, but it's a continuation, remember, so we just bypass them. We do go through these pages as a teacher. One of the things in being a teacher of the Peaceful Solution that we do want to keep in mind also is when talking about that compassion and consideration, man, think about your students, whether they're children. If you've got a classroom and you've got 30 children in it or 20 children or whatever, you've got a big load on your hands to know, what's going on with those children. What did they have to go through at their house this day that they woke up and either ate or didn't have anything to eat and came on to school? What's going on in their household? Were they being yelled at? Were they abused the night before? What's going on? What's affecting their ability to learn and their interactions with others? Do you have a child that's being a problem and not showing respect and being aggressive and so forth? What's going on in their life? You can't just hang them on the wall and forget about them. You got to find out what's going on with them. And so it is with us as adults. Somebody's being aggressive. Let's find out what's going on with them. What's going on in their life? What's causing this? There's none of this that takes place without a cause. Something in their life in the past or something going on now in their life is having an effect on them and contributing to their choices. And so, as a teacher of the Peaceful Solution, let's find out what's going on with your students. Okay, well, here's page 6. What's mine is mine, and what's yours is yours. Now, that's a little bit different than the saying that I always learned, from others, which is, what's mine is mine, and what's yours is mine. Have you ever heard that? Yeah. Well, that's really the prevailing attitude out there to some degree with people. But with the peaceful solution, what's mine is mine, and you know what? What's yours is yours. I have no right to it whatsoever. I have no right to tell you what to do with what's yours. A moral attitude, remember morals aren't going to hurt anybody. You can always turn back to page 8 and look at morals. What do they have to do with my character? But throughout the peaceful solution, we're talking about morals, and you can go back and look anywhere and find out what a moral attitude would be in determining how to conduct yourself in a certain action or a certain situation. Excuse me. So a moral attitude regarding property means to respect the possessions of others. How do you respect the possessions of others, do you have in mind what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine, and you just go and take it and use it, and you're like, oh man, I'm taking care of his stuff. I'm going to return it when I get done with it, No, you didn't even ask. You stole it. Respect the possessions of others. We have a whole unit on respect. I mean, it's very important to learn what respect really is. And all of this works together. Remember that word synergistically. The author of the Peaceful Solution used that quite a bit. It's all synergistic. It works together. Nothing stands on its own. So everyone owns things and has the right to use them without fear of their belongings being stolen or damaged. Well, there we go again. We do have that right. But in the world we live in today, we have that right. But the way things are, we live in constant fear of our possessions or our land or house or wife or child or whatever being stolen. It's a constant thing when you have people around that don't practice the peaceful solution, that don't know the peaceful solution, and tend to rely on what they've learned in growing up and the things that people have done to them. They in turn get the attitude, well, it doesn't matter anyway. There's no use me trying to build anything for my family because the IRS is going to take it, or it's going to get stolen, or I'm going to get divorced and lose it all. So there's always that fear of everything being stolen or damaged in the world today. So to demonstrate a moral attitude towards the possession of others, you must refrain from touching or taking someone's belongings without their permission. Now, that's a key thing, because to get their permission, you have to learn to ask, And if you are going to ask, you've got to learn to practice self-control, to convince yourself to ask rather than just going and taking something. And to do that, you've got to have some high moral values on not being a thief. And to do that, you've got to know a little bit about character and how to practice self-control. See how it all comes together and is synergistic, and you got to do it all? Well, that's why we try to start with, as Kantan mentioned last class, is that we try to start with the character unit so you can get a foundation of what character is. You can get a basic idea of what it all means in the first place. And then we move on, and we move to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And that's the way that it is always suggested that it's done, with schools, with groups, with different ones. Now, from time to time, we've had people that it seemed like the only way they were going to have any part of it was to, they wanted respect, they wanted it right away, or they wanted self-control, anger management, they called it, right away. And so, we might open the door a little bit with that, and then they could see as they went through it the need to go back and find out what character was. Because if you start with like the self-control book that we're on right now, you'll be hearing things about character, you'll be hearing things about acceptance, You'll be hearing words that you might not even know. And it's because you've missed the previous books that build up to self-control. So you'll want to go back and check out those things. So anyway, you can see why it is important to start with character and then move on. All right, so the asking, you've got to ask permission, and then you have to be willing to accept that answer, yes or no. If I come to you and I ask you, hey, my lawnmower's broken, and of course it could be anything. It could be a pencil even, but my lawnmower's broken, and I'd like to mow my lawn, and do you mind if I use your mower? And if you tell me no, I have to be willing to accept that. For me to go into, what do you mean no? I'm trying to make the neighborhood look nice and everything. I'm right next to you. You don't want me to cut my yard? Okay, well, when I get a ticket from the homeowners association, I'm going to tell them it's because of you. Well, that's how some people react to being told no. And it's because they haven't built that foundation and don't know really what character is all about, and they haven't learned to practice self-control, and they haven't learned to show respect and not bully, because that thing is bullying, trying to force a person or make them feel guilty, or you're going to blackmail them into doing something to make them get you to use their belongings, right? That's not the way to go about that. That's not what the peaceful solution is about. And that's what causes the lack of peace. That's what causes war. That's what causes fighting, So not asking the owner his permission before taking or touching his belongings is called stealing, plain and simple. It's amazing how many young people know this. We've gone to many schools, and it could be a very young elementary group or junior high or high school. And it's just amazing when you ask what's it called, and 2 or 3 people or more raise their hand, and they say, well, that's stealing. It's really great to hear that they know this, but they know it, but they have, the possibility of them having been taught the depth of it is really not there, because the only course I've ever run into, and I've looked at many of them and been involved in many of them, but the only one I've ever seen is the one that you have in front of you. You, as a teacher in training of the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, it goes into the depth of what stealing is. It goes into the depth of what respect really means and what self-control is. And you have it in front of you right now. It's the only one, I'm telling you. This program is not a commercial venture to go out and make a bunch of bucks and send some lobbyists to Washington to make a lot of money for the corporate entities and the sponsors and everybody else. It's not that. It's about the people. It's about people learning the peaceful solution and changing their lives. It's about changing the hearts and minds. So, we know in the peaceful solution, we know that force doesn't work. We know that bullying someone to make a decision is like force. Yeah, you don't have the gun to their head, but it is, you're emotionally or physically bullying them into doing something. It's force. And force doesn't work. People have to make a choice. They have to be presented, the right way or the wrong way. Here it is. What you going to do? Which one are you going to choose? And that's the peaceful solution. And that's why it leads to having peace and safety and security in your lives. No one's forcing you to, because force only changes a person's mind for a minute while you're standing in front of them. That's all it does. The minute you go away, it's on, buddy. All right, so, not asking the owner for his permission before taking or touching his belongings is stealing, and this leads to serious consequences, as we will explore later in this unit. Now we do explore the consequences that come from making a wrong decision, not only with self-control, not only with touching things, stealing, not only with disrespect, but we look at all of it. And so we'll have some examples and some things that you can compare along the way, but please feel free to venture back into your own life and visit the consequences that came your way because of the conduct and behavior you've been involved in. Feel free to do that, because that's what's going to make the difference. You go back and you look at current like similitudes that on things you probably haven't experienced, but you have examples out there that you can look at and say, man, I never want to be a part of that. Well, you can set your mind right then in advance not to be a part of it. Or, you can look back at the consequences from what you've done already, and you could say, man, the times I've done that. Now, you don't want to sit there and kick yourself over and over and over again. You just want to make a decision and set your mind not to be involved in it again, And guess what? There's going to be some things that come your way from time to time that you're going to have to really, really step up and look at all the possible consequences of your action before doing it. I can tell you that many times, including even today, I can look back on a situation that I would have done differently if I had the opportunity to go back and do it again. When I can think about who it might have hurt and what problems it might have caused, whether anybody was really emotionally or physically hurt because of it. Problems could have been avoided if I had only made a different decision. So by not weighing all of the things in advance and then making the right decision, then you do things that hurt people or have a consequence with people. And so it goes. We're all learning, and we continue to learn. And even as you teach the peaceful solution, you might find that you get more opportunities to make these choices. You get more opportunities that come your way to visit, what will come my way, to really look at it, and then you'll find that, oh man, I made the right choice or the wrong choice that time, or I made the right choice, and you can, file that away where it belongs so you can use it in the future. All right, so morality regarding property also means not damaging or destroying someone's property, as in the case of vandalism or graffiti. This is also a form of stealing, by the way. Damaging or destroying the property of others deprives them of the right to use their belongings. Taking it from them. They don't know where it is. You're only going to use it for a minute, but you take it, and all of a sudden they need it, and now they're running around looking for it. What did I do with that thing? Am I going crazy? Is something wrong with my mind? There's all kinds of emotional stuff that could come from removing something, from somebody's possession, them not knowing it, and thinking that they have something wrong with them. What did I do with it? Am I losing my mind? Am I getting old? I can't remember anything. So we don't know what these things are going to cause, but hopefully we can look at and think about what consequences could be caused by our actions if we're not careful. You gotta leave yourself some room to grow, though, too. Remember, we talked about having room to grow and not kicking yourself over and over and over again, but realizing that, okay, well, you know what, I made a bad decision. What can I do to straighten it out? Let me apologize to everybody first off, and then what physically can I do to fix this problem if it's at all possible? That's something you'd want to visit and try to take care of. Especially when it comes to damaging someone's property, there might be some restitution involved. And it might be kind of hard at first, but when it's done and you've done that restitution, you have a great feeling, really, in knowing that you did the right thing. All right, so handle with care. Moral principles can also be applied to the environment and how we care for that too. We need air, we need water, we need plants and animals to survive, and all these things make up our environment. I can think of many instances right now where the lack of concern and the lack of high moral values set concerning, for instance, the forests. The rainforests are part of that delicate ecological balance in the world. The oxygen that it supplies and the toxins that it takes out of the air. and the food supply that it produces. All these things are done away with when instead of leaving them alone, we decide we need the lumber worse. And we want some lumber at a low cost, and so we go and we clear out these things, destroying entire forests, and the people in those areas are destroyed, and the politicians benefit from it, but the people really don't. It makes their lives worse. We could go look at the water. Again, the water supply that's so defiled right now. These companies that say it's okay to recycle wastewater into your water and drink it to make a profit, or the ones that say, no, it's okay, we want to build this nuclear reactor right here on the water, and there's no problem, we're not going to have any problem, and then it ends up leaking radiation into the entire water supply of a whole nation, or even more than the whole nation, the entire world. And then the air, you look at the air, how messed up it is. The oxygen content in the air is nothing like what it should be. So here we all are, and who do we have to thank for it? Well, we have ourselves to a big degree. We have companies that don't have that high value on human life and human health, and the profit is more than the profit's worth more than a person's life. It's the same with war. Human life means nothing to those that, except their own life, to those that are willing to kill other people. So we need air, water, plants, and animals to survive, and all these things make up our environment. And we do our part to care for our environment by not polluting the earth with litter or using harsh man-made chemicals. And there's many other things that go along with that. It's not just that contaminate our land, water supply, and atmosphere. We are demonstrating regard for life when we do care for our environment. And there's many more ways to care for our environment than just not using some chemicals and so forth. It's just like we talked about the cutting down of trees. We should enjoy having trees. If it becomes a necessity to cut it down, well, trees are there also for firewood, for warmth. But we also want to regenerate. We want to make sure that we're doing our part to create life or help develop that creation of life by planting or helping things grow. We need plants, we need trees, we need animals, we need all these things. You can't do without any of it. So let's go ahead on over to page 7. I wanted to go ahead and turn on over to page 7 real quick, but I wanted to mention something about one of the things that has a huge effect on self-control. And we're going to get deeper into it, of course, in the self-control unit, but I want to remind you along the way, because we're going to be talking about controlling your thoughts, feelings, and actions right here on page 7 at the top. And we'll probably be able to get through this page. But in the character unit, we were introduced to the idea we were introduced to influences and what an important part these influences play in our lives, whether it be positive influences or negative influences. It plays an important part in our lives. And on page 60 in the character unit, it talks about how influences are all around us, and how our values play an important part about not being influenced to get involved in something that we shouldn't be involved in. Just like a person that I know that has an extreme high value on human life, I don't know what influence could possibly come his way to get him to be influenced to kill somebody. I just don't know what influence would possibly exist to get him to do that. Now, over a period of time, and with the right peer pressure constantly bombarding, and without a high moral standard, that value system, the person probably could be taken down to a point where he thought it was okay to kill somebody. an entire lifetime of being, I would say, I would use the term brainwashed, but brainwashing kind of makes me think of cleansing the brain. So bombardment of influences, an entire lifetime of it, can have a huge effect on somebody. And influences are all around us. So you got to remember, an influence is something or someone or something that has the ability to affect your attitude, your way of thinking, your feeling and behaving, the way you think, the way you feel, the way you act. That's what an influence has, the ability to change. It has the ability. It doesn't mean it's going to. What you stand for, your value system, your ability to practice self-control, your understanding of what character and respect is, all these things work that synergistic thing again to protect you from these influences that come your way. In the character unit, I think it was the one that showed the young man behind the brick wall. There was a rocket coming his way, influences, it said on the rocket, and he was behind this wall that was built with respect, care, concern, compassion, self-control. He had that wall built up that protected him from these negative influences coming his way. And that's what we have to do. That's what we, as teachers of the Peaceful Solution, need to relay to our students that they have to do to avoid these negative influences so they won't have that effect on them. Everything you hear, everything you experience, everything you see can be an influence in your life, can influence you to do something. And we'll be going more into that as time goes. But also remember, look at page 7 real quick. Why do I need to have self-control? Well, when you can control your thoughts and your feelings and your actions, remembering influences have the ability to change those things, but if you can control it, you will make choices that will not cause harm to yourself or others. And the bottom line is you can't just do anything you want to do. You must always have control over what you're thinking and feeling so that your words and actions will be appropriate. Now, remember along the way, you're going to mess up sometimes, and you can always go back and visit page 85 in your character unit, which talks about curveballs and pitfalls that will come your way. And they will. And sometimes you're going to make the wrong choice. You know what? Leave yourself room to grow. Go back and look at it. Where did I go wrong? How did I let this influence my decision? What went down? Walk through it. Look at it. And then go back and study self-control again. All right, the second paragraph says, in fact, not only do you need to have self-control, but everyone needs to have self-control as well. When was the last time you watched the news or read the newspaper? Man, there's not much self-control being exhibited there. Have you noticed how many reports of murder, child molestations, domestic violence, assaults, all these things, and thefts and everything are reported daily? When even a few people within our society lack self-control, the results are crime, fear, anxiety, and hatred. Now, I'm not going to go through it completely, but it'll be coming up here very soon in a few pages in advance. But look at that picture right there, and what does it make you think of? Well, it says stop and think, right? And that's what we want to do. We want to stop and think. Really think, not just play around. Stop and think. Well, okay. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and do this. Give it some thought, and really take everything within you. If there's any possibility of you being influenced to do something that, and really a lot of times you'll have a gut feeling about it. There really is something to that gut feeling thing. You have a gut feeling that, maybe I ought not do this, or might be I ought to call somebody and see what they think about it too, you have that gut feeling. Guess what? That's your opportunity right there to practice self-control. That's your opportunity to look at the whole situation, see what's taking place, who it could possibly hurt, what damage you could possibly do, what authority you could possibly throw away, or usurping someone's authority. You can look at all those things and get some advice if you need to before you make that decision on what you're doing. That's the way to do it. We're going to make mistakes, but you're going to have these curveballs and pitfalls. In fact, I want to visit that a minute. If you have your character book, let's go to page 85. I've got it here. We got a few minutes. Curveballs and pitfalls. Fitfalls too, but pitfalls. You've got to set your mind in advance so when these curveballs and pitfalls, I'll say it right here later, but come your way, you can have the intestinal fortitude, the moral character, the high value system. You can have that all, come around you like a coat of armor and protect you from making the wrong choice. So the curveballs and pitfalls are unexpected situations. See, that's when it comes. It's those unexpected things. It's those things where we assume that someone had the permission or the authority or whatever, and we get involved in things, Oh, wait a minute. You mean this isn't your car we're riding in? Oh, no, man, it's my brother's. He won't care. I just took the key from him. And you're sitting there riding in it. Now you're part of it, too. You're part of the theft. It's these things that come about, these unexpected things, in that situation, you could have asked, hey, I didn't know you had a car, and then found out the story. Oh, I don't have one, man. It's my brother's, Oh, he won't care if I use it, So these unexpected situations, the ones that come flying in from the side, curveballs, boom, they can test your resolve to maintain a positive character. They come up when you least expect them and can catch you, here it is, off guard. You didn't set your mind in advance for this. This was an unexpected one, So you can find yourself in the middle of a bad scene, and it could lead you to making a bad choice that you will regret later. And sometimes we make these decisions and we're able to correct some of the things and apologize and kind of fix the situation to some degree, and possibly no one got too bad hurt and all that. But sometimes it's a major deal and people get really hurt. It could even be the loss of life or sickness or somebody totally losing it and quitting their job or whatever the case might be. We can make those bad choices that we will later regret. I remember, I think it was Abraham Lincoln that was very upset about what one of the generals did at one time, and he wrote a letter. It was a scathing letter, man. He was giving him a tongue lashing. He was going to let him know what he thought about it. And he wrote it all down and everything, and he proceeded to fold it up and put it away. He wrote it down. He kind of got it out of his system, but he never sent it to the guy. It was found out afterwards what he had written. And so that might be the thing to do sometimes when we're really thinking about getting on somebody. Maybe we ought to write it down and look at what it says and get somebody else's advice and say, hey, I was thinking about sending this to so-and-so after he did this. What do you think about it? And that person might give you some great advice and say, are you crazy, man? I wouldn't send that to anybody, right? So let's think about those things. Let's practice compassion, consideration for others, be empathetic, and practice self-control in all our dealings. And as a teacher with our students also, let's remember they're delicate. Their emotions are delicate. And let's treat it as such, okay? And we thank everybody for being here. Well, the next class will be on Sunday night at 5:30, and we look forward to hearing you the 30th, Sunday the 30th, okay? Look forward to seeing you. Thank you for coming.